Welcome back. Another episode of the Whole Nine Yards. Drew Piana, Brandon Kokorian here on a Saturday night. Big trade in the NBA happened. Also going to get into some NFL predictions and also react to Steelers Ravens. We'll just get quickly into it though. So the biggest news so far since our last episode is the John Wall and Russell Westbrook trade. I'll get your initial reactions on this first.
Yeah, this was something that was going to happen, and it seemed like from when he requested a trade, well, they both did, but when Westbrook first requested the trade, it seemed like the only option was Washington, only because he had to make the salaries match, and they have basically the same exact contract with 2 years and a player option left for the same amount of money, just about. So it was really the only destination possible if he was going to get traded, which for a while it didn't. It seemed like it was going to happen draft night, which was the report that it was going to happen before the draft, but they couldn't figure out the draft pick that they wanted, so it got delayed a couple weeks, and then it turned out to be a 2023 first round pick that was protected. I think it's like lottery protected, but I mean that was a trade. It's basically just a swap between the two, and it's kind of just a change of scenery for John Wall. He hasn't played in he hasn't played in a year and a half, but he's only played 50 games over the last, I think it is 2 seasons. He's only played 50 games, and he's coming off a torn Achilles, and he's 30 years old, which means that, and we've seen Durant is coming off one. Clay Thompson has one. DeMarcus Cousins came off one a couple years ago, and there's been other guys, but I think it more impacts a guard, especially like Wall, because he's so fast, and that's what his game's on. It's on speed and athleticism. And while if you look at KD or Clay, their games is more. It's not. It won't affect them as much. And we'll have to see with Durant when he comes back. But because he's bigger and he doesn't rely on his quickness as much, I don't think it's going to affect him more than it is Wall, even though Durant's older. But I
I
think this.
think
Well, I was going to say the situation was just over in Washington. I think he just needed to be traded, and even if he came back, he was definitely not going to be the same player, and it wasn't going to work out. So I think he just needed to be traded.
if John Wall returns to his like prime, if you want to call it, which is probably like a top 3, 4, 5 point guard in the league, it's probably going to be John Wall in a completely different play style, especially in Houston. If James Harden's still on the team when the season starts, John Wall's going to have to play off ball a ton. And he's really never done that so far in the NBA. Uh, so that's going to be interesting to see. Like you said, with the torn Achilles, I don't think his athleticism is going to be there, at least not as much as it was before these injuries, not to mention 2 full seasons. You still do get older, even though you're not playing. I, I don't know how good he's going to be when he does come back. If he is going to be just as good as he was before the injuries, I think it's going to be a completely different play style. He's not going to be relying on his quickness. He's going to have to develop a jump shot, at least more so than before.
Well,
He's not going to be able to just be more athletic than everybody else on the court.
the problem is that he doesn't have a jump shot. I think he's a 32% career 3 point shooter, and I think he's 42% from the field or 43%, but he's never been a shooter. And 32%, he's had a couple of years where I think it was 35 1 year, but most years it's really below 32. He's had a couple of years where it was above. So he's not a great shooter either. And I mean, unless he's developed a jump shot that can at least be like 34% from three, 35% from three, I don't see him really changing his play style. And you're right, he's not going to have the ball. It's going to be the same situation where Wall and Westbrook are guys who are, when Wall was healthy, they were both at the top of the usage rate in the NBA, and they're both playing with Harden over these last 2 years, who's number one in usage rate. So I don't see how he's going to be better than Westbrook uh, in that offense. I mean, they have a new coach and a new system, possibly, but I don't see how the offense still isn't basically just Harden having the ball every possession. I don't really think Harden would give that up just because they had John Wall. If you wouldn't give it up for Westbrook, why would you give it up for John Wall? So
I I tried to think about what the Rockets gained from this trade, and I think the only thing I could really take away from it was Russell Westbrook did want out of Houston. He made that known, and this was probably all they could get. And it also, the money worked. So I don't I don't think the Rockets are in love with John Wall.
well,
I don't.
do you think John Wall is enough to keep Harden?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, I think the same too.
I don't know, and that doesn't mean that Harden's gone before the season starts
Well, it's
or
really just
anything
to
like
sign the
that.
extension, though.
He's never. I don't think he's going to sign an extension. He Harden might even, he might be on the Rockets when the season starts. I would not be surprised at all. But yeah, I don't like. I definitely don't see Harden retiring as a Rocket. That's for sure. I'm
Yeah,
not sure what direction Harden wants to take it in because he's in the spot where, yes, he's got the MVP, he's got all the statistics, but now he's going to have to start proving that he's a winner and that he can be the number one on a championship winning team. Something that, Giannis is much younger than Harden. Uh, and Giannis isn't quite to that stage yet, but that's, as these playoff losses keep adding up, that's somewhere Giannis is going to be eventually too. So it's curious to see what Harden really wants to do, whether, he tries to build some type of super team. I know he wanted to try to there was a rumor about him getting traded to like Brooklyn, and that would set up a Irving, Harden, Durant trio, which in my mind would probably not work. The fit is horrible. It just comes down to like Irving, Harden, and Durant are so talented. Maybe they just win games based off that they're more offensively gifted than every other team they play against. But I wouldn't see something like that working out. It's tough to envision like the perfect team for James Harden to win a championship, especially if he's going to be the number one. I don't I don't know what you feel about James Harden, but at some point, and I think he also wants to do this, he's going to have to start winning actual games. Maybe he thinks that's easier to do in the East, so maybe he tries to get, with Philly, Brooklyn, like I said, some team like that, but
Well, the thing I'll say is that the Brooklyn stuff that's basically not possible. The only way to make that possible would be a three team trade because the Rockets have been asking for a young star and picks, and the Nets don't have any of those. I mean, they have picks, but they don't have a young star. So the only way that he could go to the Nets in a trade is if they were to include a third team, maybe even two other teams to get it to four
well,
teams.
if you're the Rockets, would you if okay, so if you're the Rockets and this is the only trade you get, would you do Harden for Levert, Dinwiddie, Allen, and 4 first round picks?
No, because none of those guys are going to make a difference on your team, which is why they need a third. Which is why the Nets need a third team if they even want Harden. It's like they never said they did. Now, I mean, KD and at least KD wants to run about Kyrie, but they said they want him. They basically are the GM of that team. So if they really want him that bad, they would get him. The Nets would, but if they want a young star in return, and you were to look around the league to see who they could trade for in a three-team trade, like with the Nets, the only guy who's really available who is classified as a young star would be Michael Porter Jr. of the Nuggets. And it really comes down to, do you think, if you're the Rockets, do you think Porter is even good enough to be that like a young star classified like that? Do you think like he could become a franchise player where in a 3-team trade you'd want him? And would it even still be enough for a guy like Harden who's still in his prime and he's still like a top 5 player in the NBA? I don't think you could deny that. So I don't know what you think about it, but if the only way he could go to Brooklyn is if it'd be a 3-team trade and it'd be at least the only guy available right now is Michael Porter Jr.
To me, I'm not sure on Michael Porter Jr. I think who knows, his defense has got to improve. I have confidence it will though. If I'm the Rockets, I there's no reason. I just don't think there's a reason for me to hold on to Harden. I'm not going to win a championship unless I can bring in John Wall and then find some other top 10 at at the very least NBA player and bring him in for next to nothing.
And that's not going to happen.
Barring that, you're not winning a championship. I would be completely willing to trade Harden. It's just going to come down to when's the best time to trade him and when can I get the most for him. Is Michael Porter Jr. Is Michael Porter Jr. in picks and maybe still like a Dinwiddie or like a LeVert? Is that enough?
A possible trade could be, if it were to be the Nuggets, Nets, and Rockets, it would be Harden to the Nets, probably like a PJ Tucker also to the Nets. It'd be like Karis LeVert and Porter Jr. to the Rockets with maybe like 2 or 3 first-round picks. And even that, I don't know if you actually would take. And then the Nuggets would get like Dinwiddie, Allen, maybe like another bench player for the Nets, and maybe like a first-round pick. I mean,
all right. Well, let's go with that trade. Let's go with that trade. If from the Nets perspective to start, I'm not doing that trade. I know it's Harden, obviously, top 5 player in the league, but fit still matters to an extent in the NBA. And Irving, Durant, and Harden sounds like a very bad fit. Irving's personality traits, I'm not a big fan of, especially, I'm a Boston fan, so I had to deal with that for a bit. He's very volatile. With Harden there in the mix, it kind of takes Irving out of the spotlight and makes him, I think, 95, if at the very least, of the NBA population would call Irving the 3 on that team. And I don't think he wants that at all. And that doesn't necessarily mean anything, but, locker room and all this type of stuff, like this all means something, especially when Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant are on the team, because that's, their mental is like everything. So from the Brooklyn perspective, I'm not giving up Dinwiddie, LeVert, Allen, and 2 or 3 first-round picks for Harden. If I'm the Nuggets, it's debatable. Initially you would have hoped for like being able to send Porter and some other assets. Maybe if you can get rid of like Gary Harris or something for Bradley Beal, but that's probably not going to happen. If it was this or nothing as the Nuggets, it's a tough call for me. I probably say no, though, just because I think Michael Porter Jr. has so much potential. And Allen, Dinwiddie, LeVert, not LeVert, but just Allen and Dinwiddie, they're solid players, but they're, bad starters, great bench players. And I don't know if that's worth it. And from the Rockets' perspective, if this is the best trade I can get, then I would do it. I'm not sure that it is, though, whether it's right, whether that's, the best trade you can get right now, or if the Rockets think they can wait and trade him later and get more. I'm not completely sure. But I mean, yeah, I'm trading Harden as the Rockets GM no matter what. I'm just trying to figure out what's the best time and what's the best return I can get on Harden.
Well, the other trade is, like you were saying, Philadelphia. So they have the young star and Ben Simmons that they can trade. And if I was them and I wanted Harden, I would just hold on to Simmons until like the latest possible point that you could get a trade for Harden, which would be the deadline if you're looking for this year. If you're looking to trade for him, and I'd I'd only offer Simmons and see what the Rockets say because the Rockets have to trade him, whether it's this year or next year. They're gonna have to do it, and even if it doesn't happen this year, by the time next offseason comes, the best offer is still going to be the Sixers offer. So if I'm the Sixers, I'm only going to offer Simmons no picks because if they really want to trade him, that's the only destination that he can really go to, unless they think Porter is going to be like amazing and they'll take that deal. But who even knows if the Nuggets would do that deal? Like we were saying, like if they even get enough in return, like Allen, Dinwiddie, and maybe like a couple picks and maybe another bench flyer. So if I'm Philadelphia, I'm gonna put that offer out there and hold it there. And if they take it, then you get Harden, which I think would make them probably like a top five team in the NBA. If they had Harden and Embiid, especially with the additions that they made in the offseason. And if they don't, then you're still a top team in the East. I don't think you could get to the finals with that team, but I think this would be the last year anyways. If they didn't make it past the second round with this team, I think you'd have to do something to not blow the team up, but shake the roster up.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with that. Uh, I don't know how much I love Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid on the same team. Simmons to me is very interesting because defensively he's so good. Offensively, he can bring the ball up. He's obviously enormous for a point guard, and he can play really. I mean, he can play the forward, power forward. I mean, his offensive game, like obviously shooting is horrible. I mean, I think that's really the biggest thing he needs to. I mean, I feel like everybody knows this, but it's just true. Is he needs to improve his shooting.
I don't really think I'm not saying he doesn't have to improve it, but I don't really think he has to improve it like exponentially, like everyone's saying. As long as he could just hit mid ranges, then I think I really like him. It doesn't sound like you're as high on him, but I think if you were to trade him to the Rockets and put him on his own team, I mean Wall's there, but like that wouldn't really matter that much anyways. If you were to have his own team and build a team around him with just shooters, which is what basically the Rockets do anyways, I think he'd be really good. Now they
He'd
probably
be really
wouldn't.
good, but how far does that team get? And the answer
Well,
is probably not that far.
it's also you'd have to restructure the roster, and you're in the West, which doesn't help. But it would take a couple years for you to be like a top team. But I think you could be a top team in like 2 to 3 years if you had
Who
Simmons.
would like who? So if Simmons is your one slash the guy you're building around, who's like your two and your three? Like, is it just somebody like a Klay Thompson who can shoot, play defense?
Well, I think they do what the Bucks did with Giannis, in that you get 3 and D guys, and you shoot people who can shoot the ball from the outside, and you clear the paint for Simmons, and he either drives the hole and scores, or he kicks it out for a three. I think you just do what Giannis does. Now he's not as good as Giannis, but he can. I mean, he's a triple double threat, and he could, if he was in his own offense, he could probably average 22 to 25 points, 10 assists, 8 rebounds with excellent defense at the point guard position, or basically he can guard 1 through 4. So
I mean, Simmons is the best player we've mentioned so far in a potential Harden trade. It still brings me back to if you trade for Simmons and this is the route you go down, how far do you get if Simmons reaches his ceiling? If you're going to build like similar to how the Bucks have done, and my answer is at least in the West, the way it's structured right now, I don't see them getting to the conference finals in the next 4 or 5 years. I don't see them getting, you the second round is probably their ceiling, at least in my mind, which is kind of where the Rockets have been stuck.
are you talking about like if you were to trade to the Rockets and you spend 10 years there, they wouldn't get past the second round?
I mean, maybe there's 1 or 2 years where they get super lucky because the West is injured or something, or there's a year where whether it's LeBron or whether it's maybe the Clippers, like Paul George or Kawhi Leonard have a season-ending injury, they don't make the playoffs or something. But barring injuries, if the West is like what it is now, I would say for the next 10 years, yeah, Ben Simmons and the Rockets would not make the conference finals.
See, I would disagree with that because one, they could go like the Giannis way, which I think if they were to do that and build the roster correctly and have the pieces around him that fit him, I think in even though the West is tough, the teams at the bottom, like they're tough teams to play, but they're not real playoff threats, and they don't have. I mean, we'll have to see what some of the teams are like. Obviously, with like the Pelicans, Zion, really Grizzlies, and Job, you have to see if they really are like star players. But I think you could. Again, it would be the next like 2 to 3 years. They definitely struggle a little bit because they would not be as good of a team as the other teams. But I think and again, they don't have their draft picks, which hurts. But if you can get draft picks from Harden and maybe you move other couple guys and you can just accumulate a couple picks.
Well, I mean, in this scenario, you're probably not getting draft picks considering you're trading it for Ben Simmons. I'd assume
Well,
that'd
no,
be
you'd get draft picks.
me. I mean, nothing super significant, but
You'd get no, you would get a couple picks. Again, if I'm the Sixers, I'm just saying I'm not going to give you a pick because there's no other offer on the table. But I think you definitely get a couple picks. Again,
yeah,
they wouldn't be
maybe
great
you get
picks,
like
but
two first round picks heavily protected. Like maybe they're just lottery protected, which I mean, in my opinion, I mean, that's about as useless as a first round pick can get. Not
but
that, I mean,
in
obviously there's potential, but
But like first round picks, like they're usually just had so that you can trade them, and they basically have no picks because of the trades that they've made over the years. So if they were to get like 3 to 5 first round picks, um, in total, not just for the one trade, but like with the Westbrook trade, they got one, and then if they were to trade Harden, maybe they get like 2 first round picks and maybe like a pick swap, um, maybe like 2 pick swaps. Who knows? Like if you were to do something like that and just accumulate a couple first round picks, then you could always make a trade to move up in the draft or trade for another player to go along with Simmons. Like there's definitely more options, and every year someone wants to get traded from their team. So it wouldn't surprise me in like 2 years if Devin Booker wants to get traded, or maybe Michael Porter Jr. does turn into a star, but maybe he wants to get traded. Like you never know what could happen. So
if yeah, let's okay, so let's go with Devin Booker, I guess, in this scenario, just as an example. If the Rockets do kind of go the honest route and they get Devin Booker as like a 1A or a 1B to Simmons, then yes, I definitely would say the Rockets can make the conference finals and make the finals. Uh, but is that team winning a championship? Maybe.
I mean, it could. I mean, there'd be, and again, this is looking into the future by a lot, but like there'd be no LeBron. You wouldn't think like the Lakers would be as good
Yeah, I mean, if the Lakers don't have
unless they
LeBron,
signed, yeah, unless they signed like Giannis or something like that. But and let's say they don't, and they stay to the Bucks. Let's say, they wouldn't be as good because AD's not that type of player who could like lead your team to like a championship. The Clippers, Kawhi and Paul George, they both have options after this year. I would say Kawhi leaves. Seems like Paul George wants to stay. That's what he said. I would say Kawhi leaves. So who knows where he goes? And again, there's teams that could rise in the West and then fall. So you, I mean, maybe like someone like Cat wants to leave Minnesota. So I mean, there's so many players that could leave teams. So and it happens every single year. So I don't think you could really say that they couldn't win a championship. And again, if they were to have Simmons, they'd get someone else because they know that they have a star player who's only 24 years old.
you'd think that. You'd also say the same thing about, you know, Russell Westbrook when he was
Well, I
in,
mean, they did have star players.
well, not at the end, but
Well, I mean, Paul George is an MVP candidate last 2 years
yeah,
ago.
I guess that's true. Yeah,
And there are
yeah,
smaller markets, so they can't sign free agents. They can only trade for them. Houston can sign free agents
yeah. I mean, if they could get a Devin Booker, then that definitely changes my
because,
mind.
I mean, like, again, like, it's all what happens in the future, but Chris Paul is only going to be good for another, like, 2 years, probably, if he doesn't get injured. So who knows what's going to happen with Booker and Aiton, like, if they're going to be making the playoffs or not.
I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if the Suns didn't make the playoffs this year.
Yeah, even just this year, but even like when Paul's 35, I think he is. So in the next 2 years, he's going to be falling off. And if they're not making the playoffs now, they definitely won't make the playoffs when he leaves or when he's done. So I wouldn't be surprised if Booker wanted to get traded or when his contract was up, he just left.
Yeah, I'd be a little bit surprised if Booker was to leave, but yeah, I mean, we'll see. I guess it's a fair point, if you are able to build the Simmons with shooters around him type of deal, then maybe, if you show potential in the regular season and playoffs, then maybe you just get a Devin Booker or I don't know, somebody like a Devin Booker to sign, or you get somebody with over trade. That would definitely, I mean, change my mind on that. But yeah, I mean, Simmons alone with like B plus players around him. I mean, to me, yeah, that's not a conference finals team. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess we'll get somewhat back to the John Wall Russell Westbrook trade. Looking at Westbrook on the Wizards, I'm not. I mean, I'll let you start since you're a bigger Russell Westbrook fan than I am.
Yeah, I think when looking at it, like neither team's gonna win a championship with the trade, and the Wizards haven't even made the playoffs the last 2 years. So I think they're if you look at the East and you look at the teams that are in the East that are most likely going to make the playoffs, at least in my mind, I think it's Bucks, Celtics, Heat, Sixers, Nets, and I'd probably Raptors, and then I would say
Did you say the Heat?
yeah, I said the Heat.
Okay.
And
That's six.
yeah, that's six. And the team that I'm leaving off there is the Pacers, which again I wouldn't be surprised if they make the playoffs,
I mean,
but
those six teams you said are like basically guaranteed.
that's what I'm saying. I'm saying those
Yeah.
six teams are gonna make the playoffs, and the Raptors, I'd say like they definitely fall off a little bit. I don't think they're as good as they've been, but I think they'll still make the playoffs. But I would say the last two seeds would be between the Pacers, the Wizards, and the Hawks. And out of those three teams, I think I kind of like the Wizards more than the Pacers and Hawks. If you look at,
Well, the Magic would be in there.
no, I don't think the Magic are as good. I know
Really?
they made
I
the playoffs
mean,
the last couple of years, but they're not that good. I don't think they could get one of those two spots over those teams.
I don't think Clifford is the best coach ever, but he's coached this team to a manageable, close to 500 record with maybe not close to 500 talent. I mean, not that the Magic team is horrible. You don't have Isaac next year, which is gonna hurt for sure. Uh, Somebody like a Mo Bamba might have to just start actually playing well, like
Yeah,
where he was picked.
unless like
But
Cole Anthony's really good, their best player is Nikola Vucevic, and it seems like they're going to trade Aaron Gordon. So it just doesn't seem like they're going to be able to make the playoffs.
I think they have a shot. Yeah, I don't know that they do make it, but I would throw them in that, at least in that mix of, yeah, Hawks, Wizards.
And
Do
at
the
least in
Hornets
my
have a
mind,
chance?
I don't think the
Debatable.
Hornets could.
I
I don't.
think, I mean, okay, so they had 23 wins last year. If not Lonzo, if LaMelo Ball wins Rookie of the Year and Hayward
Was he wrong?
plays, if Hayward goes, 20 points a game, and we'll call it like a 87 overall, like in 2K. Like, I don't know how else to say it. Like, if he can play something like that, like,
You're basically saying like if he was like an all star in the East,
yeah, if he's like a all-star, not a starter, but if he's an all-star in the East, then I mean the Hornets would be in that mix.
they'd be in the
Now,
mix. I don't think they'd make it.
yeah, maybe not. Like, I mean, well, at the end of the day, do if I was, any of these teams, do I am I dying to even be the 7 or 8 seed? Definitely not. Like, would I be? I would be completely fine not making the playoffs. Now, I'd rather make the playoffs than not, but you know,
Well,
there's clearly,
yeah.
benefits to like only winning 20 games in a season, the lottery. But yeah, I think it's time for some of these teams to start winning actual games. Now, they're not the Magic. The Magic kind of stuck in that NBA purgatory, but a team like the Hawks, you got to start winning. Uh, the Wizards, ideally, you'd start winning because I mean, if you win 20 games next year, I mean, Bradley Beal's
Well,
not
they're
going to be
not they're
too.
not winning 20 games next year. They have arguably the best backcourt in the East, so they're not going to win 20
I
games.
mean, yeah, I mean, they might not win 20, but if they don't make the playoffs, like if they win 30 and don't make the playoffs,
Well, it's a 72 game schedule, so I think they
all right,
could win.
well, whatever 30 and 52 is, like whatever that
42.
ratio is with 72 games. I don't know
For,
what the
it
math would
would,
average out to be, but
I think they could go 500 at least. It's when you have two star players like that, you win games. Like that's how the NBA is. And even though the East has gotten better, the bottom like four teams, and you could say a fifth team in the Hornets just because they're young and they really don't have that many good players. You'd have to hope that like Hayward and Ball are like good, and Washington can continue to improve. But like those are just like free wins kind of against those teams. And even though the West is tough, there's a couple teams at the bottom that aren't as good. And then you could always just get wins against the top teams. But I think for those last two spots, I mean, I guess we could pick who we think, or I guess we could choose when the season's about to start. We could see who we think's
yeah, I
going to
think
get those
before the
two
season
spots.
starts, we'll probably end up doing like a
We'll do a
prediction for the
prediction for
seeding.
each.
Yeah.
Yeah, but just quick, I think the Hawks, even though they made a lot of improvements in the offseason, they only won 20 games last year, and their best player is Trae Young, who I don't really like that much. He's even though he averaged 30 points a game last year, he's kind of like Harden, like a mini Harden, and that the offense is basically just him, and he's not as even though he's a good shooter, he's not like a great efficient shooter, and he's terrible defensively. But
Yeah, he's probably the worst. He might be the worst defender in the
and
league.
when looking at the Pacers, again, they were the 4 seed last year, but it just seems like they're going to regress. They have a new coach, Turner, Oladipo, Sabonis, Brogdon. It's a good four, but not a great four. And I wouldn't be surprised if two like Turner and Oladipo get traded at the deadline.
If none of them get traded, I think the Pacers make the playoffs. Now, probably not as a 4 seed, but can
No,
they be the 7 seed for sure? Could they even be the 6 seed? If one of the top 6 teams has a couple injuries, they could maybe make the 6 or the 5. Um, but that's assuming Oladipo and Turner don't get traded. I would be super shocked if by the end of the regular season next year, the Pacers team looks the same as it is right now.
no, it'd rather be different at the trade deadline this year or going into next season. They're definitely
Maybe, yeah.
gonna. I mean, they'll look completely different going
Yeah.
into next season at least. So
Looking at the Wizards, though, I mean, yeah, you're definitely right. I mean, I mean, Westbrook Beal that's a nice backcourt. But they were also, I want to say they were the worst defense in the league last year, and they've essentially done nothing to change that. If they had drafted in a Kongwu, maybe you have some hope on the defensive side. Avdiha, I mean, I don't hate the Avdiha pick.
yeah, no, I like it.
I don't. Yeah, I like the pick. He did fall in the draft, so I mean, I'm not gonna hate on the pick, but it also goes with saying you had a horrible defense and you've essentially done nothing to change that. Will having Westbrook make you a better defensive team? Maybe. Westbrook's not a bad defender. Is he going to be the type of defender where he was in his prime, where he's just super athletic and he's able to play both sides of the court with equal energy at 110%, 82 games a year, or 72 in this case? Probably not. This team can make the playoffs, but yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's a lock. I wouldn't be surprised if they don't. So we'll move on though. Do you want to move on to Steelers Ravens, or do you have more to say? Or
No, I think that was all. I think we'll get into the predictions before the season starts, so we'll just save it for
yeah,
that.
yeah, we'll get into Steelers Ravens. A highly anticipated game, postponed for a long time. Unfortunate because Lamar Jackson and a lot of other players on the Ravens ended up getting COVID. So, you know, it wasn't a very fair matchup, to say the least. The Steelers ended up winning 19-14, which, you know, as an 11-0 team, only beating the Ravens by 5 points when they have Robert Griffin III and Trace McSorley as their quarterbacks, and Justice Hill is their only running back, and Gus Edwards. Not super impressive. Um, my really only reactions are, the Steelers, and they do this all the time. They love to play down to competition. That's all I can really say. You didn't have James Conner for this game. I still, we've talked about the Steelers versus, how good they are compared to the Chiefs and how good they are compared to some of the lesser teams in the AFC, like the Bills and the Titans. I still think they belong in like the second tier, probably in a tier by themselves right now, with the Chiefs being in the first tier and some of the 3 through 5 seed probably being in that third tier. I still don't love the Steelers team. I don't think their ceiling's very high. I will say though, there's a legitimate chance this team goes 16-0.
Yeah, I'm looking at their schedule now, though. I think they lose at least one or two of those games. I think they play the Bills at Buffalo, they play the Colts, and they play the Browns in Cleveland.
I agree. I don't think they go 16-0. I would be a little bit surprised just because like that's so rare, because it's only ever happened once for a team to go 16-0. And the Steelers team is, it would be a very bad 16-0 team, at least compared to the other 16-0 team on paper.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but I mean, they're 11-0, so they're gonna be favored in all their games. So I don't even know if I can necessarily say that, but they're better than every other team they play against. And there's only really 2 games that I'd be scared of to lose, and that would be Bills and Colts. Now we'll get into the Steelers next week matchup a little bit later. They host the Washington football team, so we'll talk about that later. But yeah, I mean, I think the Steelers team has a legitimate chance to go 16-0. Now, if you were the Steelers, if you're Tomlin and you're 14-0, or even if you're 11-0 or whatever, like, would you try to go 16-0, even if let's say you're 14-0 and you have the number 1 seed guaranteed, you've already clinched it, would you play the next 2 games?
Yeah, I think it's like the 2016 Warriors when they went 73-9. They didn't have to play the rest of those last couple games. They were meaningless, or number 1 seed anyways, but they still went for it to get the record. And I mean, some people claim that because of that, they were too tired for the playoffs, which I think is just an excuse. But I think, especially in football, if you're 14-0, I think you have to go for 16-0. And I mean, for their sakes, they honestly probably wouldn't mind a loss, so that assuming Kansas City loses one more game, and let's say the Steelers have 1 loss going into Week 17, and the Chiefs have 2, well, I guess you have to see how the tiebreakers work. But if they could know that going into the last week of the season, they could get the number 1 seed by even losing that last game, even with 1 loss, I think they'd be glad to do that. Because why would you
Yeah.
you'd so much rather be able to rest that last game, still knowing that you could be the number 1 seed, than rather knowing you're the number 1 seed and playing it because you're trying to go 16-0. Just because even though you have a bye, you can get 2 weeks worth of rest. I mean, that's just huge.
So I think the debate of being a number 1 seed / a number 2 in years prior and getting the bye, and resting for 2 weeks in the regular season, sometimes 1 depending on what happens. But I think that rusty, should you play those games debate has always been interesting. I mean, I would always err on the side of, if you don't have to play a game, then just, you feel free to have your starters play like a quarter or 2 or 3. But I mean, don't feel pressured to try to win the game. If I'm the Steelers, obviously I'd love to be 16-0 and win a Super Bowl and be the first team to go undefeated in the 16-game schedule. But would I want to go 16-0? No, and the reason is the Chiefs are better, and I would not want to go 16-0 and not make the Super Bowl. Uh, I not that it necessarily means anything because people like us, we both think the Chiefs are a better team, and we don't think it's necessarily close or debatable. But I still think it's a bad look to go 16-0 and then end up losing in the conference championship, maybe even the conference championship. I don't know how you feel about that, but
Yeah, we've been saying the Chiefs are the best team in the NFL, and that if they were to play against each other, the Chiefs would be favored, I would say, and I think most people would expect them to win. Uh, I mean, like, would they like to go 16-0? I mean, yeah, but like I was saying, like you'd so much rather be able to rest that last week, still knowing that you could be the number one seed, than having to play, even though you're guaranteed the number one spot. So I guess it really just comes down to how they are in the playoffs. Because if they play like they are in the regular season, I would I wouldn't even be surprised if they were to lose that divisional round game, depending on who they play, just because of the way
yeah,
that they
Sam.
play. Again, it had to be depending on who they play, like the matchup, but it would not surprise me if they lost that divisional round.
Yeah, I think the Steelers could use a piece of humble pie or whatever. I hate to hate on the team because of their schedule, but who have they really played? Uh, they've beaten the Titans in Tennessee. That's a great win, but it's not like Steven Gostkowski didn't miss a field goal to tie that game. And the refs, I think you could argue, might have helped the Steelers a little bit in that game. They beat the Ravens by 4. It's a solid win. But other than that, have they really won any games that have been great? No. It's kind of similar to the Colts. Sorry, not the Colts. The Browns.
The
Sorry,
Browns, yeah.
the Browns. Just not many wins that make me think, wow, okay, I'm sold on this team. I don't even know if there's one for me on the Steelers. I think it's just they're 11-0, so they haven't lost. They're not losing the games that they shouldn't lose. So yeah, looking at the Ravens, I think they're the more interesting of the two teams right now because they're 6-5, and I don't know exactly what to think now because do I think the Ravens are one of the top 7 teams in the AFC? 100%. When healthy. Are they going to make the playoffs? We'll probably end up talking about full playoff brackets later, maybe next week, updating because I want to say like a couple weeks ago we talked about it, and since then, obviously records have changed. But just looking at it, I mean, the Browns are now 8-3, so they're 2 games up. The Ravens have beaten the Browns, but
And they
still,
play not this next game, but the game after that in Cleveland. So
yeah, I think that. I mean, okay, I would pick the Ravens in that game, but still, even if the Ravens win that game, they're not going to be ahead of the Browns in the division. I mean, the Browns Tennessee game is going to be really big, actually, just because if the Browns do win that game, they can lose to the Ravens and not be worried. I think the Browns. I mean, 8-3 is just so it's you have such a nice cushion as the Browns that if you don't make the playoffs, that's a really bad look, especially because you're the Browns and you have such a bad history, at least recently, that if you're to start 8-3 and not make the playoffs, that's a really bad look.
yeah, I mean, I'd be surprised if they didn't make the playoffs like now. Now they do have a tough game. They play Tennessee, and we'll talk about it coming up. But they play Tennessee in Tennessee, and then they host the Ravens. So if they lose next week or this week, and the Ravens win, the Ravens will be 7-5. Browns will be 8-4. Then that game becomes a lot more important because if the Ravens do win that game, then you have the same record and the Ravens have the tiebreaker.
Yeah. I mean, if well, I won't spoil my pick. But yeah, that's gonna be super interesting. I think there's the possibility that both the Browns and the Ravens make the playoffs. If the Browns don't make the playoffs, it's that's a colossal choke job. Looking at the rest of the Browns' schedule, the next two games are tough, but then you get the Giants and the Jets back to back, which is really nice.
Well, the only thing with that Giants one is that Jones may be back for that game.
Yeah, I mean,
And it's in New
so
York, so
so are the Giants a really really bad team? No,
but their defense is
but
really good.
I mean, it's a team that if I'm the Browns, I'd be happy to play. Like you're probably gonna be favored in that game.
Yeah, no, I mean I think you would too, but it's a team that's kind of similar to your team without the running game, but it's really just reliant on your defense and hoping that they can make plays and stop drives. And your offense has to score basically like 20 points to win the game. I mean, that's
Yeah,
what you'd hope going into the game, but that's kind of how both teams are built. So I think it'll be a tough game, especially if Jones is back, which it seems like he probably will be for that game. He's missing this week, but and maybe he plays the week after that, but I'd say he's probably back for that
and
Browns game.
would you pick the Giants in that game?
I mean, we have to see what goes on these next 2 weeks.
If
Um,
Daniel Jones is back, would you pick them right now?
right now, without knowing what happens these next 2 weeks, I'd pick the Browns. But I mean, who knows? Maybe the Browns lose these next two games. The Giants play the Seahawks, which they'll most likely lose without Jones. But I don't know. I mean, when the time comes, we'll decide who we'll probably pick that game, honestly, for our predictions. But right now, I'd go with the Browns. But in 2 weeks, I may go with the Giants. I don't know.
I'm probably going to go with the Browns when we pick that game, just because the Browns could lose both of these next two games and lose by a good amount. But the Browns have done a surprisingly good job of beating not good teams. I mean, that's how you become 8-3.
Well, they barely beat them, but yeah.
No, exactly though. But at least they get the job done. I would pick the Browns in that game. Even if Daniel Jones is back, I still think the Browns are the superior team. Their running game is, I guess, elite if you want to call it elite. I don't know that a running game can truly be elite, but
Well, I'd say
yeah.
the running game's elite, yeah.
No, I'm saying it is elite, but like, can a running game truly be elite? Like, I mean,
I think it can.
that's like calling a kicker elite. Like, yeah, I guess a kicker can be elite, but
Well, I think that's way different though. So if you have an elite running game, then you control the clock, which means your defense isn't out there all the time. You have more time of possession, and it's easier to move the ball. You're not throwing the ball. You're putting in the run game, and their offensive line is really good. So I'd say you can have an elite running game, and that's what the Titans do.
I mean, I think the Titans' running game is a lot better, probably. But
It's better in that their one running back is better, but between Chubb and Hunt, I think that's pretty good. That's probably
yeah, no, it's pretty
probably the
good.
second best running game in the league.
Maybe it has to translate to wins against, like valid NFL teams. But yeah,
Well, I think that's where their quarterback comes into play, where
yeah.
they don't trust him to throw the ball, so they don't throw the ball, which is why it's kind of surprising to see them at 8-3. But I think it's because of the defense and the running game. But
I mean, the way the season's going, would you accept Baker Mayfield's fifth-year option?
I guess it really comes down to how it ends, and if Stefanski thinks that he can be the quarterback for this team to get into the playoffs and win games. I mean, personally, at least in the offense that they're running, it's like the Vikings offense, like the Titans offense, where no one asks the quarterback to do that much. But at least in those offenses, I trust Cousins and Tannehill more than I do Baker. If in a throwing situation or a time in like a 2-minute drill, I'd honestly trust those guys more. So to me, I'd say, I mean, I guess you'd probably have to pick him up unless you have a better replacement because you are a playoffs team. But if you do find a good enough replacement, or maybe somewhere in the draft, maybe you trade up, or something crazy happens, or you trade for a quarterback, something like that, I'd say you pick it up.
Yeah, I mean, the way they're handling the Baker Mayfield in general just reminds me of
Jimmy Garoppolo last year. Not that the two teams, the Browns and the 49ers, are similar. They're not. The 49ers are the far superior team, and I think Jimmy Garoppolo is better than Baker Mayfield for sure. But from a trust standpoint, the Niners did not trust Garoppolo at all last year, or not at all, but for the most part. He only really threw the ball when they needed him to throw the ball, and ultimately, they fell short of the Super Bowl because of Garoppolo's inaccuracies.
Yeah.
I want to say in the divisional round, Garoppolo threw how many times? Like single digit attempts.
It was really. I'm gonna look it up, but it was. I remember
Yeah,
it being really low.
it was super low, and you can clearly tell that Shanahan's not in love with Garoppolo. I don't know that. Who's there? Is it John Lynch?
He's their GM. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think John Lynch is in love with Garoppolo either. We'll see how that plays out. But bringing that back to the Browns, I can tell that Stefanski is clearly not in love with Mayfield. I don't know how the front office feels about him, but would it surprise me if Mayfield's fifth-year options declined? A little bit because he's the first overall pick. But, from what I've seen on the field, it can't, how could it surprise you? How could it? Are they going to find a better option at quarterback?
Well,
At
that's the
least
thing.
short term, probably not. But yeah, if I'm the Browns, why not? Not draft a quarterback in the first round, probably not. But why not take a flyer on a third or fourth round quarterback?
Yeah, and you could take one in the first round. I think they're saying there's probably going to be like 5 quarterbacks in this first round. So it's
You could.
You
I don't
could.
know that you do, but
Well,
yeah.
the only thing is, I would say I don't think you do either. But if you don't think Mayfield's the guy, but you know that you have a playoff team and players that it's not win now, but it's more so win now than win later. Do you take a quarterback in the first round, pick up the option, see how he plays, and if he's like the same guy, you can hopefully that quarterback you took molds into being the starter the next year, and then you're still right where you are, and then you hope that he could be better than Baker. I mean, it's an option. I don't think they do that, but you definitely could do that.
Yeah, and it's going to come down to, who the Browns front office actually likes, whether that's a quarterback in the first, second, or third round. Optimally, though, if you could get a quarterback you really like in the second round, like a Jimmy Garoppolo situation, obviously Baker Mayfield's not like 39 years old, but it's kind of like a win-win if you draft that quarterback and that kicks Mayfield in the butt to start playing well, and he turns back into what he played in his rookie year and progresses on from that to play even better. Then awesome, you've got a franchise quarterback, and you now have a first-round quarterback who's sat behind Mayfield. And I would not be surprised if that quarterback has built on what you spent on him, and you're able to get a first round pick for him, or maybe a second or a third. And if that's a win-win. And if Mayfield doesn't play well, then you have a quarterback that you like that has sat on the bench for a bit. And even if Mayfield's not played well, he's definitely learned from Mayfield, and you've got another quarterback that you can plug in, and hopefully he's like the first good quarterback you've been able to find
I
in
think
the
the
past 30
situation would
years.
be. I think the situation would be very similar to the Chiefs in that they had Smith. Obviously, the team success wasn't the same in that the Chiefs were like a top. They were always a consistent top team with Smith as their quarterback, and they couldn't get it done in the playoffs, which is the reason why they wanted to move on from Alex Smith. But it took Mahomes at 10 in the first round, had him sat on the bench, and then the next year he came in, and obviously he's the best player in the league. Now, I mean, that's obviously what you would hope if you were to do that. But even if he's not the best player in the league, if he's like a top 10 quarterback, and that same situation were to happen where at the end of next year, maybe they make the playoffs again, they lose in the first round or like on wild card weekend, and he just hasn't played well the entire season, and he still hasn't progressed, then you have a guy who could step right in, and the team could still make the playoffs most likely, and if he's really good, then you could be better. I think that's a situation that you'd hope would happen.
Yeah. I think the difference between the Chiefs and the Browns in the situation is, Smith, it didn't matter how good or how well Smith played, unless they won a Super Bowl or something, but they definitely weren't going to do that. It doesn't matter how well Smith played in that season. He was going to get benched for Mahomes.
Yeah.
I mean, if Mayfield gets a kick in the butt and starts to play well and builds off his rookie year. I mean, I would not be surprised if Mayfield, signs an extension and then he becomes the franchise quarterback for the future. But yeah, I mean, we'll see. We'll definitely see on that.
And just one thing, I looked up his stats in that divisional round against the Vikings, and Garoppolo was 11 of 19 for 131 yards, a touchdown, and a pick.
Okay, that was more attempts than I thought, honestly.
But even
I feel like
still,
there was a game where he had like no attempts, but yeah. We'll move on to predictions if you want to do that.
yeah, we could do that.
We'll start with the first game. So the first game is Washington at the Pittsburgh Steelers, and the Steelers are favored by 7. I'll let you start off on this one.
I'm going to go with Washington to cover. I think the Steelers would still win the game, but I'm going Washington to cover. Their defense is really good, their defensive front. And again, it's like we talked about, I think it was, I don't know if it was the last episode or the one before that, but they technically have like the top pass defense. But again, that's kind of skewed just because they've been, in the games that they've been losing, they've been getting blown out. So teams are running the ball against them. But their defensive front is for real. They have a lot of playmakers on that front 7, and they get after the quarterback, which is something that the Steelers can struggle with at times. Roethlisberger, he could shake guys off, but he can't move out of the pocket like a young quarterback with mobility. And the Steelers really don't have a great run game. They rely on their defense and Bud Dupree he tore his ACL. He's out for the season, which hurts their defensive line a lot. They still have TJ Watt and Casey Hayward and like Stephon Tuitt, but Bud Dupree, I think he had 8 sacks this year, and he's one of the more underrated players in the league, but he's gone for the season now. So even though I think the Steelers still win, I think Washington can definitely cover this.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I'm going to take the Washington football team as well to cover the 7. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Washington win this game. I'm going to pick them to win the game. Like if this was not the spread and it was just money line, no, I would not pick Washington to win the game. But would I be surprised? Definitely not. This is the type of team that, again, like I say all the time, this is the type of team the Steelers play down to. I don't know what it is with Mike Tomlin. Maybe it's just I don't know. Mike Tomlin's clearly proven to be a top coach, but for some reason they play down to competition a lot. I would not be surprised to see Washington beat the Steelers. I think their front 7 is really good. Chase Young, I mean, obviously. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised to see Washington win this game by a field goal or something last second. I'll move on to the next game, though. Eagles at Packers. I mean, it's a difficult call. I'm going to go with the Eagles, though. And the reason is because, I mean, the Eagles are very desperate. I mean, and the NFC East is still very attainable for them. Obviously, I don't think either of us are picking them to win the division. Their schedule is very difficult. But I'm still going to take the Eagles. They're very desperate for this win. I don't think they get it. I still think the Packers win, but 8 points is a lot. I think with a couple plays here and there, the Eagles are able to stay close, maybe similar to the Seahawks game, and the Packers win by like 6 points, 23-17 or something like that.
I'm going to go Packers here. They proved me wrong in last week's predictions when I thought the Bears could cover. I think it was 10.5, I think it was. And the Packers blew them out. And I don't really see the Bears and the Eagles as that much of a difference in their teams. I think they're kind of similar in that they both aren't that good at all. And again, the Packers are home again, just like last week. And the Eagles are really good at keeping games close and then covering late. They always seem to put together a touchdown drive right at the end or like a touchdown and a field goal to cover. So I wouldn't be surprised if that would have happened, but I think the Eagles are in shambles. And the way the Packers played last week, it's going to be hard to see the Packers not beating them by more than 8 points. So I'm going to go Packers.
All right, a little bit of disagreement. Next game, Rams at Cardinals. Cardinals are 2.5-point underdogs. I'm going to take the Rams here. I know the Rams have been pretty I guess you could call the Rams inconsistent this year. I guess you could also say the same about the Cardinals, especially losing to the Patriots was a really unfortunate loss, and that actually does kind of shake up it doesn't shake up the playoff picture, but it makes the NFC playoff picture much more interesting. I'll take the Rams in this game, even though they're not the home team. I think overall they have the better roster. They don't have the better quarterback. They have the better coach, though, in my opinion. I think I was actually pretty high on the Cardinals. I'm not low on the Cardinals by any means. Don't get me wrong, but we've seen Kingsbury over the past few weeks. We've seen his flaws for sure. I think we've seen maybe some reasons for why in college he didn't have a bunch of success. Not that he's a bad head coach at all. I still think he was a solid hire for the Cardinals, but we can clearly see some inexperience, and we can see, the differentiating factors between a Kingsbury and a McVay / Shanahan / Frank Reich / these types of coaches. So I'll take the the Rams to win this game and cover.
Yeah, I'm gonna go opposite. I'm gonna go with the Cardinals. I think that Murray's another week removed from the injury that he had against the Seahawks on Thursday night, like a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago. So I think he's more healthy now than he was when they played the Patriots, and he really had a hard time going into that defense. Now you could say that was Belichick outcoaching Murray and Kingsbury, which I think is partially true. But I think he'll be definitely better here. He's at home against the Rams. I'm not a big guy on the Rams either. I think they're just way too inconsistent. It seems like they're one of the best teams in the league one week, and then they lose a terrible game to the Niners the next week. So I'm going to go Cardinals to cover, and I'd probably go with them to win the game, honestly. I wouldn't be surprised if they won the game. I think it'll be a close game, but I wouldn't be surprised if they won the game.
Next game, I would say this is probably the game of the week, maybe. Browns at Titans. Titans are favored by 4.5. I'll go first. I think we might end up agreeing on this one. I'm going to go with the Titans to cover the 4.5. This has been my take since this podcast started that the Browns are not legit. We've talked about it multiple times. Both of us left the Browns out on our first playoff prediction type of thing. We both said the Browns were not legit in the Fact or Fiction article reaction that we did. So I'm kind of stuck in that take hole, but I also still believe that the Browns are not a legitimate 8-3 team. They're more, in my opinion, in like a 6-5 or like a 5-6 team, like a 500 team, especially with Baker Mayfield, how he's played. I'm going to take the Titans to win this game. I think the Titans are still better coached. I like Vrabel much more than I like Stefanski. I think the Titans have the better quarterback. I think they have the better running game. I think they have the better – I think wide receivers and weapons are pretty close there. So we'll see. I'm going to take the Titans in this game, though. Home field advantage. I think it's just going to come down to the Titans are better coached, and Tannehill's not nearly as mistake-prone as Mayfield, and Tannehill also gets a little bit more trust from the Titans than Mayfield does from the Browns. So I'll take the Titans to win this game.
Yeah, I'm going to go Titans also. I think we both think the same on the Browns in that we're not high on them. And I would say offensively, just basically with Mayfield, I think he just holds them back a lot compared to what they could be if they had like a top 12 quarterback, but even top 15 quarterback. But yeah, I think the Titans are definitely the better team. It's in Tennessee, which obviously helps. And the way that they've been playing these last couple of weeks, I mean, they had a dominant win against the Colts last week in a real statement game. And again, I still think the Colts can win that division, but that was a really good win in Indianapolis. Now they're coming home to play the Browns, another tough team to play, a good defense. But I think this is the time of year where Henry just gets rolling, and you saw it last week. He had, and even the week before against the Ravens, he's had 2 straight 130-yard-plus games. And I don't really see him not getting another 120 plus and maybe another touchdown or two. So I'm going to go Titans to cover in this game.
Last game for the predictions, and then we'll wrap it up. Cowboys at Ravens. Since you're the Cowboys fan, I'll let you start on this one. I feel like I have a feeling. I think I know where you're going to go with this one, but.
Well, I'm going to go with the Cowboys.
Wow.
But did you think I was going to go Ravens?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to go Cowboys. I know they're not going to win the game. I mean, I guess we still don't know if Lamar's going to play. I don't know if that came out or not.
No, I don't think there hasn't really been too much on it.
So, I mean, maybe if he doesn't play, I'd definitely give us a better shot. But even still, they still have a really good defense. They'll have their running backs back most likely. I know Ingram and Dobbins didn't play against the Steelers, but they were available. So I wouldn't be surprised if they played against the Cowboys, which would not help because our run defense is terrible. But if Lamar doesn't play, I guess it kind of depends on – I'm going to take it as Lamar is playing. So I'm going to go with – well, I guess it'd be the same thing as I'm taking the Cowboys anyways. So, you know what? I'm going to take them no matter who's at quarterback. I'm going to take the Cowboys cover 7.5. I don't think even with Lamar first came back from COVID, that'd be, I don't know, to beat them by more than a touchdown, I think that'd be kind of tough. I think our offense is good enough to keep pace with them, at least as long as it doesn't get past like 30 points, I would say. So I'm going to go Cowboys.
Both of these teams are super desperate right now. Cowboys because they want to stay in the NFC East race. I don't know that this is a must-win for the Cowboys to make the playoffs. I know you may think differently on that. We'll see how it plays out. The Ravens, this is it's difficult because it's technically also not a must-win for them either. But at 6-5, if you do fall to 6-6, that is not enjoyable. You'd have to win out to make the playoffs, and even then at 10-6, it's not a guarantee you make it. I'll take the Cowboys with the 7.5. I think the Cowboys keep it close. I don't think they win the game, but I think they keep it close within a field goal, around a field goal, maybe 4 or 5 point game or something like that, 24-21 or something. We'll see. Had the Ravens beaten the Steelers, maybe I could even pick the Cowboys to just outright win the game. But I feel like the Ravens, at 6-5, they need this win really badly. If they were to fall to 6-6, that makes the Browns game an absolute must win. Because if you fall to 6-7, then your playoff hopes are done. They're down the drain.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think the Ravens win this game, but I'll take the Cowboys. So I think they'll keep it close enough. And by the way, after last week's predictions, I am now 12-4, and Brandon is 8-18. So
not good for my part.
I'm getting closer to 500. I'm not super mad at 12-14 because it's not like we're cherry picking these games, and we're not picking these games thinking, yes, I really love like this team +3 or whatever. We're picking these games because it's like, yeah, these are like probably one of the 5 best games of the week.
Yeah.
Or it's like this is like a somewhat interesting matchup, or, oh, we haven't talked about this team that much, so let's use this to talk about this team or whatever. So I'm not super mad at 12-14.
Yeah, if we like really want to make like good picks, we definitely pick up different games, but we try to go best. They get the best games, and if they are like most of them are the best games of the week, and that usually means that what you pick probably isn't going to happen just because it's usually either a really close game or just a complete blowout. There's really no in between. So
yeah. But anyways, that's gonna wrap it up for this episode of the Whole 9 Yards. If you made it to the end, appreciate you sticking around. Any last words, Brandon, before we end this episode?
Not much. I would say this time next week, we'll probably give our NFL playoff predictions, like the official ones, because I think it's that time in the season where we could see what teams are going to be there and which teams are on the cusp. So we'll pick between the teams that we think are just going to make it and teams that are just going to drop out or barely miss it. So I think that'll be next week. But yeah, it's going to be probably the same stuff, NFL stuff, and then NBA again, starting in 2.5 weeks, the 22nd. So we'll get into that. And there's still no baseball stuff. No free agents have, no, none of the big free agents have signed yet. So when that happens, we'll definitely talk about it. But until then, probably just NFL up until NBA season.
Yeah, quickly before I ended, obviously we said this before, but on Spotify, on YouTube, if you're listening to this, you're on one of them. But yeah, we're on both Spotify and YouTube right now. We got an Instagram now. We said this last episode, I think, but it's the dot whole 9 yards. So feel free to drop that a follow if you want. So we post on there, whatever, for when new episodes are up. But yeah, I think that's basically it. We'll be back probably Tuesday or Wednesday, finals week. So, things are a bit different this week. So we'll see how things go with that. But yeah,